I might sound like a robot, okay, but I'm here, it's me, but I will stay like this.
That's fine. We can hear you fine now, I think.
Sí. Sí, vamos a empezar en 5 minutos. Disculpen el retraso. En 5 minutos, incluso menos, me hacen indicaciones técnicas de que estamos finalizando unos ajustes. Buenos días a todos. Buenos días a todos. En primer lugar, quisiera pedirles disculpas por este retraso. Hemos tenido unos minutos de retraso porque inesperadamente hemos tenido una caída del servicio de Internet, lógicamente ajena a la voluntad de la Fundación, y nuestros técnicos pues, han conseguido poder restablecer. Entonces, lo primero es pedirles disculpas por este pequeño retraso. Como les decía, bienvenidos al segundo Foro Participativo Online del Proyecto Mercado Halal, foro que hemos titulado Aproximación al turista musulmán millennial. En nombre del director de la Fundación Tres Culturas, José Manuel Cervera, en el mío propio y en el nombre también del equipo que trabaja en este proyecto, en este Mercado Halal, les doy la bienvenida tanto a este foro como a los que los estén siguiendo por la plataforma Zoom, como a aquellos que lo estén siguiendo por el canal de Facebook de la Fundación Tres Culturas, por el que estamos retransmitiendo en directo. En primer lugar, debo informar a todos los asistentes y a todos los participantes que el evento está siendo grabado, ¿de acuerdo? Porque luego lo vamos a poner a disposición de todo aquel que no haya podido estar con nosotros en este preciso momento. Lo pondremos en nuestro canal de YouTube, al que también animamos al que se suscriban, y haremos también un podcast de este foro. Haremos un podcast. Referencia obligada al tema del COVID. En fin, animamos siempre desde la Fundación Tres Culturas en cualquier evento que hacemos, y en este no va a ser menos, a que por favor sigan, aunque la vacuna está más cerca, sigan todas las recomendaciones de las autoridades sanitarias y en un halo de responsabilidad pues tengamos un poco de paciencia en estos difíciles momentos que vivimos, que nos hacen que este evento, que debería ser presencial, pues siga siendo online. Yo voy a presentarles el acto, les voy a presentar a los ponentes e inmediatamente les voy a dar la palabra. En primer lugar, querría agradecer muy especialmente a nuestros 2 traductores de hoy que tienen una tarea complicada porque vamos a hacer una doble traducción a inglés, por un lado, saludo también a nuestro compañero Juan Carlos Acosta, y a portugués, aprovecho también para saludar a Candice, con lo cual yo le voy a pedir tanto a los participantes como a los intervinientes, por favor, que tengan un poco de paciencia porque tenemos que hacer 2 saltos en la interpretación simultánea, pero por la calidad que estoy seguro que vamos a tener en el foro, va a merecer la pena. Entonces, por favor, pido un poco de paciencia, tanto a participantes como a audiencia. Ya saben ustedes, y me dirijo ahora a la audiencia, que tendrán que seleccionar el canal que quieran oír, podrán seleccionar canal inglés, podrán seleccionar canal portugués. Como les decía, les explico la estructura del acto, que básicamente va a ser la presentación por mi parte de los 3 intervinientes de hoy. En segundo lugar, una vez presentados los intervinientes, yo le voy a dar la palabra a Javier Albarracín, que ahora les voy a presentar, que él va a presentar también, valga la redundancia, el foro, e inmediatamente pasaremos a una charla titulada Aproximación al turista musulmán millennial, a cargo de Shelina Janmohamed, que es vicepresidenta de Ogilvy Islamic Branding. Y después vamos a ver un caso práctico también a cargo de Nabeel Shariff, director de la agencia internacional Serendipity Tailormade, a los que aprovecho para saludar y para agradecer su presencia en el acto de hoy en la Fundación Tres Culturas. Nosotros los saludamos desde Sevilla. Javier creo que está en Barcelona y nuestros también queridos contertulios creo que andan en el Reino Unido. Al final de esto ustedes van a tener la oportunidad de hacer preguntas, y yo les animo a que hagan esas preguntas. El primer foro que también tienen ustedes disponible en YouTube y en iVoox, tratamos sobre los conceptos básicos de la certificación halal y de la certificación Muslim Friendly también. Era lógico que en este segundo foro nos dirigiéramos, moviéramos el prisma hacia el potencial cliente, hacia el turista musulmán millennial. Y de ahí que tengamos tanto a Shelina como a Nabeel y, por supuesto, a Javier para que nos ayuden en esta tarea. He de decir también que esto forma parte del proyecto Mercado Halal. Somos 4 socios en este proyecto, Fundación Tres Culturas como socio beneficiario principal por utilizar la jerga técnica y también tenemos como socio andaluz, porque esto es un programa de cooperación Andalucía-Portugal, Portugal bajo Alentejo y Algarve. Quiero aprovechar también para saludar a nuestros queridos socios, Merca Córdoba, que sé que nos están siguiendo por parte andaluza, y Cimbal y Nerve por parte portuguesa. Y bueno, no quiero extenderme mucho más. Sí, voy a proceder a presentarle a los intervinientes, como les decía, 3 intervinientes de un magnífico nivel y de gran conocimiento en la materia, que estoy convencido de que nos van a ayudar a poner esa otra piedra que nos falta una vez ya que pusimos la de la propia certificación. Javier Albarracín, que será un poco el que va a coordinar esta conversación, porque pretendemos que sea un diálogo, y insisto, en la parte de ruegos y preguntas nos gustaría que participaran. Javier Albarracín es licenciado en Ciencias Políticas y de la Administración y máster en Relaciones Internacionales por la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona y amigo de la casa, he de decir también. No es la primera vez que tenemos a Javier. Muy buenos días, Javier, bienvenido.
Muy buenos días, un placer, como siempre.
Muy bien. Javier tiene más de 20 años de experiencia en tratar temas de mercados musulmanes con diferentes responsabilidades. Trabajó en la oficina comercial de la Embajada de España en Estambul. Posteriormente fue también responsable durante 9 años de la región MENA, Norte de África y Oriente Medio, en la Agencia Catalana de Internacionalización e Innovación de la Generalitat. Y también, que es donde más contacto ha tenido con la Fundación, pues ha sido director de Desarrollo Socioeconómico del Instituto Europeo del Mediterráneo, al que aprovechamos también para saludar a los amigos del IEMED durante 9 años. Actualmente es el socio fundador de la consultoría especializada Barcelona Halal Services, y desarrolla pues, proyectos dirigidos a consumidores musulmanes en diferentes empresas e instituciones. Él, insisto, va a tener esta conversación con los 2 ponentes, empezará con Shelina, continuará con Nabeel y después me devolverá la palabra para que ustedes puedan intervenir de la manera que consideren oportuna, o bien haciendo algún post en el canal de Facebook, las compañeras de comunicación, las que aprovecho también para saludar, nos lo pasarán a la mesa para que podamos hacer la pregunta, o bien directamente aquellos que se hayan inscrito a través del chat de la plataforma de Zoom. Todas aquellas preguntas que ustedes quieran se las vamos a trasladar a los ponentes. En segundo lugar, les quiero presentar a Shelina Janmohamed. Ella es la autora de un superventas que se titula Generation M, Young Muslim Changing the World. Bienvenida, Shelina. Muchas gracias por aceptar la invitación. Este libro, al que me refería hace un segundo, explora una generación de musulmanes globales que creen que fe y modernidad van de la mano, ¿no? Y Shelina nos va a explicar un poco pues, qué influencia van a tener en un futuro próximo en estos mercados con el tema halal que estamos hablando, ¿no? No me quiero meter mucho más en su presentación, pero ella pues, escribe también para Daily Telegraph, para The Guardian, para The National y para la BBC. Es vicepresidenta también de marketing islámico de Ogilvy, que es el primer bufete de marca islámica global que crea precisamente eso, marcas para públicos musulmanes. Y fue nombrada una de las 500 personas musulmanas más influyentes del mundo y específicamente una de las 100 mujeres más poderosas sobre este tema en el Reino Unido. Por lo tanto, ya ven ustedes, pues qué mejor, ¿no?, que escuchar a Shelina para que nos dé un prisma de ese tipo de turista musulmán millennial. Y last but not least, que se suele decir en estos momentos, pues yo les quiero presentar por último a Nabeel Shariff. Nabeel es un profesional de la industria de los viajes, del turismo, con sede en el Reino Unido, con más de 15 años de experiencia también, que se dice pronto, y pionero en el sector de turismo halal global. Nabeel tiene una formación en marketing por la Universidad de Londres y en el 2012, con la intención de atender el mercado de viajes halal, un sector pues todavía muy descuidado, ¿no?, sobre todo en aquel momento, a pesar de su crecimiento, pues estableció uno de los primeros operadores turísticos de lujo del Reino Unido, que se llama Serendipity Tailormade y Luxury Halal Travel. Así que tanto Nabeel como Shelina como Javier son los intervinientes que tienen ustedes en el día de hoy para que nos ilustren sobre el tema. Yo volveré a retomar la palabra al final en el momento de las preguntas, que insisto, pueden ustedes hacer desde ya a través de Facebook o a través del chat de la plataforma o esperar al final y hacerlas cuando terminen sus intervenciones. Nada más por mi parte. Simplemente cederle, como se dice ahora, el micrófono virtual, cederle la pantalla a Javier Albarracín para que comencemos el debate. Javier, cuando quieras, por favor.
Muchas gracias, Germinal. Thank you very much to all of you. It's a pleasure, a real pleasure, a personal and professional pleasure to be with you in this forum. Thank you, Germinal, personally, but thank you, Fundación Tres Culturas and the rest of the partners. And also thank you, Shelina and Nabeel. It's really for me an honor. I know Shelina already for several years. Nabeel, we are just meeting recently, but honestly, for me it's an honor to get insights from the topic that we are going to have today from two experts like you. Shelina, I would start with you and I will ask you some questions, and from there you take it and you bring it wherever you think it's needed. Thank you very much, Shelina, but you're an expert, a personal expert and a professional expert in a growing segment of Muslim population that is becoming really a sort of an economic segment that is really active, valuable, creative. We tend to think about the Muslim consumers, Muslim world, as something that takes place in Muslim majority societies, North Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia. And unfortunately, too often, we neglect, we forget a quite growing, significant population of extreme value added in many senses, in creativity and so on, that, for instance, we do have in Europe. So, Shelina, I would ask you, could you please elaborate in this segment that, well, you have even brand a name for this generation. Could you please elaborate on who are they? What can we expect from them from a consumer perspective and from a socioeconomic perspective? Thank you very much, Shelina.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you so much to the organisers for inviting me into this conversation. And it's lovely, as always, to talk to Javier and to all of you in the audience. It's a great question. What does it mean to be a Muslim consumer, and how do we talk to this particular audience? Because sometimes people can feel puzzled that somebody wants to buy products and services and have engagement based on their religion. And we at Ogilvy, which is the world's largest branding and advertising network, looked into this over 10 years ago and discovered that around 90% of Muslims say there's something about their faith which is involved in their consumption choices. And so for all of us who are thinking about how to engage with audiences and consumers, this is really the place that we need to start the conversation. And the reason that this particular consumer group has emerged is a mix of the social and political climate after 2001 and the spotlight that was on Muslims, and partly because of the development of the internet and a place where young Muslims all around the world could come to create this global identity, and a sense that there was something about expressing who you are and your faith that was important for these young people who are born with these two big trends forming their identity. And so they have gone out and said, we want to be faithful. It's really important to our identity to be Muslims and to try and live by Muslim values. And again, that can be a little bit surprising for us, because when we look at the way faith is practiced and how people identify as religious in Europe and North America, typically we see that religion is on the decline. But actually, if we look at Muslim populations, the resonance, the way that young Muslims feel that their Muslim identity is important to them, is actually rising. So that's kind of one preconception that we have to get over. So there is this global Muslim consumer group, and we can talk about some of their characteristics in a moment. But really, the two things that bring them together are wanting to have faith values, but also wanting to be part of the modern world. And that's why we've seen the rise of all sorts of categories. The most visible might be fashion, that we've seen modest fashion rising. But actually, this is a cross-category engagement. This is about a whole Muslim lifestyle. So it's about food, about finance, about travel, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, beauty, fashion, and of course, travel as well. And so one of the big misconceptions around this audience, and there are 1.8 billion Muslims around the world, is that this is just a story about what's happening in some of those most well-known Muslim majority markets. We see Generation M, the term that's been coined, that I've coined for this audience, of course, in the Gulf, the Middle East. But actually, one of the surprising things is that of the 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, 500 million actually live as minorities around the world, and that there are more than 80 countries in the world that have a population of more than 1 million Muslims. So that means that this is very much a global phenomenon, and we need to think about those millions and millions of Muslims who live as minorities. And in Europe, there are estimates that there could be up to 5 million, 50 million Muslims in Europe. So this is a huge audience that when we've spoken to them about the kind of engagement that they would like from brands and from organizations, typically in every study we've asked them about the way they feel served or underserved by brands, around 2/3 consistently come back and say they would like more engagement from brands in a way that connects with that Muslim identity of theirs. And the final thing I would say at this stage is that over the summer, we saw a lot of protest, a lot of movement, a lot of discussion around the fact that we are not speaking to all of our communities in a way that is representative and honest and inclusive. While the protest may have been focused around, the Black Lives Matter, actually there is a bigger conversation going on about audiences like Muslim consumers that are not properly being represented. And attached to that, of course, is with the effects of the pandemic economically, this becomes a real growth opportunity. As our economies, they might dip, but as they start to pick up, businesses are looking for that opportunity of who to talk to. And this Muslim consumer segment, Generation M, should be at the top of the list.
Thank you very much, Shelina. You were precisely coining that term, which is Generation M, which is precisely what Germinal was saying about your book. A quite interesting book and very timely. Could you define from a marketing or consumer perspective what values might this segment have? And if you're saying that it's a sort of global issue, would it be different with your experience to target this sort of audience when they are in Muslim majority or Muslim minority countries? Would it be the same targeting them in Malaysia than in, say, England, for instance?
So let's get to know a little bit about what it means to be Generation M. So I was talking about some of the backdrop in terms of 9/11 and the development of the internet as a space where this identity could be formed. So the core target audience might be around 15 to 35 years old, but it's important to remember that this combination of faith and modernity is an attitude, it's an approach to life. And so it does extend beyond that into the 40s, 50s, and perhaps even beyond. They are people who really feel very comfortable being identified as Muslims, who see that there is real value in their faith for themselves, but also for the world around them. They want authority to be held accountable. They want to learn knowledge about the world. They're very open and engaging. They feel like they're trying to create a new story from traditional cultures, which in their words, they would say is they're bringing being Muslim into a modern era. And what all of that means is that while it's very clear, perhaps very obvious when we're looking at Muslim minorities, and Generation M is only one segment within a wider Muslim population. So we need to remember that not everybody who's a Muslim we would define in this Generation M perspective, but they are perhaps clearest when we're looking in minority Muslim countries. Having said that, of course, this tension between culture and tradition and reinventing a modern life is very present in Muslim majority countries too. And when we formulate campaigns and we're thinking about consumer ideas and products and services, there is a conversation to be had with the Generation M consumer segment within even those Muslim majority countries, because they feel they have a different story, different insights, different tensions that are pulling at them from the ones that perhaps their parents experienced, or even as a contrast to what we might call more traditionalist Muslim voices within the same communities. And that's often a mistake that brands make, is they feel like kind of being Muslim, because most people are Muslim in a majority country, they don't need to speak to that identity, when actually these young people are experiencing their Muslim faith in quite a different way. So if we look, for example, at Malaysia or Indonesia, and Indonesia is currently the world's largest Muslim population, there is an upcoming generation of young Muslim women, for example, who have been adopting the headscarf as a symbol of their faith in a way that perhaps their parents' generation didn't, but they are also going into universities and the workplace in a way that their mothers may not have done. And they are trying to create a new space for themselves which respects their families and their tradition and heritage, but also carves out something for themselves and breaks all these traditional boundaries that they would have come up against. And this is also part of the characteristic of Generation M, this desire to do good for the community and uphold the community ideals. And one of the Islamic concepts in that is called Ummah, the global Muslim nation. So this sense of kind of being part of a bigger community that you have as your family and that you trust and that you love. And I'm sure Nabeel can talk about the importance of that feeling of Ummah when you travel. But while they're trying to balance that sense of what it means to be from a community and wish them well, there is this new tension where Generation M Muslims are saying, well, they want to do something for themselves. It's really important that they explore their own identity, that they create their own new space, that they have a sense of fulfillment for themselves while balancing it with their families and communities. And in that tension is something quite interesting for a lot of the products and services and the way that the brands talk to them.
Thank you, Shelina. You have commented two words which are increasingly relevant. One is the impact of internet, and not only internet, but everything that is online, that is booming in terms of connectivity, but in terms of means or fields where you can express your own identity. And there brings the concept of Ummah, also the other concept that you were mentioning, which is the Ummah, that has also been on the table already recently, which is the Ummah, the digital Ummah, how we all belong and we can express ourselves and find complicities and so on in the digital world. How much do you think that when brands approach this segment, how much do you think that has to do with the Muslim aspect of their identity or the socio-cultural background, being it's not the same approaching a Muslim, as you were saying, in complex societies like the ones in UK or the ones in Malaysia or the ones in Germany, where the Muslim population, apart from being Muslim, has a quite heterogeneous cultural background, identity background. So should brands target the same way, say, in Turkey, a Kurdish Muslim than a Pakistani Muslim, for instance, or they really have to focus deeply into the cultural background of each segment?
I think the answer to that is yes and no, which is not the easiest answer. But one of the things that we need to get rid of the idea is this is not like when you're at school and you learn about religion from a textbook. That's not how Muslims live their lives, even though everybody might like to think that they do. And the conversation that brands need to have with Muslims is about real experience of what it's like to be Muslim. And we've started to see a little bit more sophistication in some of those campaigns. So, you know, in Ramadan, which is the month of fasting, people as Muslims aspire to live a very good, dedicated, perfect idea of fasting. But the reality of that is very different. There's a struggle. People fall short. People change their behaviors. You know, people eat more instead of eating less. And those are little examples of how what these young Muslims are looking for is a connection to the challenges in their lives. And any good brand is always there to solve a problem for a consumer, or to try and address a tension that they might be struggling with that they don't realize. And so this is really the place of the conversation. And what is exciting for brands is that whatever the mixture of cultural backgrounds or heritages, that you can find those commonalities in that experience. Of course, if you have heterogeneous groups, there may be little cultural plays or little nuances that you may want to talk to. But a really successful campaign will find that Muslim consumer moment and be able to speak to it in a way that even if you're not directly from that culture, even if you were from a different country looking in and watching an advert on Facebook, you would be able to connect with that. And if you really wanted to set yourself a huge challenge as a brand, there would be something in that even someone who is not Muslim would be able to resonate with, would be able to look at and say, I understand that struggle that somebody's going through. And brands really have to ask themselves the question, how closely into that tension and how explicit are they? Or can they frame their conversation in a way that Muslim audiences know it's for them, but feels relevant to a wider audience? So I think the simple answer is you go for that tension, you find out what your generation is struggling with, and you try and speak to that tension in their lives, and that will accommodate a vast majority of your audience. And of course, we live in, you were talking about the e-ummah and the kind of global reach of it. So we live in a world where if you show an advert or a campaign in one country that's to do with being your Muslim identity, it will be seen by Muslims all around the world, and they will feel free to comment about it. And sometimes that has done really good things for a brand, and sometimes it's led them into terrible trouble where they haven't been mindful of the fact that their concepts will be taken out of context elsewhere. So it is always worth remembering that your Muslim consumer is part of that global community.
Definitely. Shelina, there is an issue here, which is you're telling that as a segment of consumer is growing at the global scale, is growing in that sense at a quantitative but also qualitative scale in terms of middle class, in terms of creativity in that sense. But then there is a danger here. We cannot be naive in the sense that companies might approach in a simplistic way to the fact of being Muslim. So you have also the risk of doing a simplistic approach that can work as a boomerang that will hit your brand back because of the sort of approach you're doing is simple, is caricaturesque in a sense, just working with cliches and so on. Can you elaborate on how they should approach to avoid really seriously taking care of that, but without being naive in that sense?
Yeah, so when we work with brands, we find that there are two challenges, and when you observe what brands are doing in the marketplace. So the first one is the one that you've outlined, which is you've decided you should have a conversation with this audience, which is fantastic. But you're worried that you're going to say something terribly wrong and your brand will get cancelled, or you're going to actually make things worse for yourself and create a backlash with this particular audience. And the way to think about this is that you have to just do what you do well, right? So Muslim consumers, in terms of marketing principles, don't behave differently to any other consumer segment. They're not aliens that if you put in an advert that says X, they're not going to do something unexpected. And the core marketing principles are understand your audience and find the insight into where your brand or product can help them. And avoid cliches. Don't do stereotypes, because that is disrespectful to your consumer, and in this case, your Muslim consumer. And brands often forget what they know of Muslim audiences when they sit down at their desks in a meeting to plan a campaign. So when you go out onto the street, and I live in London, and Barcelona is also a very multicultural city that has lots of Muslims in it. When you go out onto the street, you see lots of Muslims and you see how they engage, you see the way they look, the way they stand, their attitudes. And somehow when we come into the office, or the virtual office these days, we seem to forget all of that, and it becomes a stereotype based on the headlines that we read in the newspapers. And so the first thing is just to apply the higher standards of marketing to Muslim audiences that you would elsewhere, and engage some experts who can understand your consumer audience, which is the reason that we exist at Ogilvy, for example, to give that expert insight. It is absolutely not acceptable to phone up your Muslim friend who works in IT or accounts and say, is it okay if I say this, once you've produced a campaign? Because they are not an expert in Muslim consumers, and they also should not have the responsibility to create your marketing campaign for you. So I think that the answer to that worry is do what you're good at and treat your Muslim consumer as you treat other consumers with respect, and get some experts who have actual Muslim consumer understanding to help you. The second part of the worry, which I think was kind of in your question, but perhaps not explicit, is that in the world we live in, people are often worried that if they have an out loud conversation with Muslims, there will be a backlash from certain parts of society. Why are you talking to Muslims?
Yeah, exactly. Indeed. In today's context, this sort of complex approach happens.
And I think the answer to that is a very commercial answer to that is, well, there is a commercial opportunity here. And that's what brands are designed to and set up to do, is to talk to audiences where they can develop growth for their businesses. But there are more complicated, but also more obvious answers to that, which is it is the right thing to do to talk to all of your consumers, in the same way that the conversation over the summer suddenly kind of went, yes, we should have better, we should have more equality in society and fairness, and we can see that this doesn't happen. The same applies to talking to different consumers. In my view, if we want to achieve more equal and just societies, I know it sounds very trivial, but the ability to go shopping and have your needs served in a way that is respectful and equal to everybody else surely is the marker of a capitalist, liberal society. So, you know, there is a moral argument to be done for it. But there's also, finally, I think for a lot of brands, we've reached a place where we are now thinking about socially responsible organizations, and often backlash it seems very loud, seems everywhere, but comes from a very small number of consumers. And I think brands have started to learn, based on that backlash, that actually it does their brand and their brand value much more good to stand firm and to actually stand up against those voices, because the kind of consumers that are coming along, both millennial consumers, Generation Z, as well as Muslim consumers, actually appreciate a brand taking a line. We don't sit neutrally anymore. We expect our brands to take a position. And one of the examples that comes to mind most clearly is that a few years ago in the USA, there was a reality TV program called All American Muslim. For those of you who are fans, a kind of an early version of, you know, Kim Kardashian and her family, or Jersey Shore, or I don't know what the Spanish equivalents are. And there was seemingly a backlash against this because the claim was that it made Muslims look normal, which seems like a very nice thing to do and not a problematic thing. But there was the brands that advertised in the break were targeted and felt under pressure by this backlash to withdraw their advertising. Now, when they did, they then had a backlash from their consumers, which said, we don't understand why you have backed down. You know, it's perfectly normal to treat your audiences in this way with a kind of respect. And actually, your brand is now diminished in our eyes by doing that. So that was the first thing that happened to that brand that withdrew and buckled to the backlash. But the second thing, and this is the interesting bit, they actually tracked down where this backlash was coming from. And it turned out to be one man in his house in Florida. And so I think the moral of the story is that your brand will gain strength if you stand up for this more open and inclusive engagement. And secondly, the backlash is never as big as you think it is.
Thank you very much. There is a last question, but if you don't mind, I will put it together to both of you, Nabeel and Shelina, which has to do with today's crisis COVID situation. So thank you very much, Shelina. Now I will move into Nabeel, and now focusing more in this segment of population, this segment of consumer that Shelina was commenting and elaborating. First of all, Nabeel, you have plenty of experience in the hospitality sector, in the travel sector, and so on. Why did you decide to specialize, to jump into that segment concretely of the hospitality sector, which is a Muslim segment?
Firstly, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, maybe now. Thank you very much for having me here. And it's a pleasure to be speaking to you all. I guess Shelina's led me on really well there, because she's actually described me. I think I do just fall into the millennial bracket, and I'm Muslim, I'm British. I identify myself as a British Muslim, and that is a complexity on its own. Thankfully, I don't have to deal with that, because I really look at travel. And you know, for me, my passion has always been travel. And I spent about 10 years in the industry before I set up my first venture. And I came out of, I remember coming out of my last day in the office, and I sort of thought to myself, well, where am I going to book a holiday? Who am I going to go to? Which site am I going to go to? Which travel agent should I have a chat with? And I didn't know. I literally didn't have anybody to turn to. And one of the reasons that a lot of brands have now appeared over the last decade through entrepreneurial spirit of British Muslims is purely to solve a problem that we previously had no solution to. And primarily, I wanted to continue traveling the world. I wanted to explore places that were outside of my comfort zone. So rather than traveling to Morocco, Dubai, Turkey, I wanted to go to Vietnam. I wanted to go to Brazil and Argentina. I wanted to see places that my peers saw, my colleagues saw. But at the same time, I wanted to ensure that I can travel in a way that is comfortable for myself. And that's really where the idea behind Muslim-friendly travel came from.
This makes full sense, normalizing the identity fact that Shelina was also commenting, which is well, identities, let me tell you, that is becoming one of the main drivers of today's politics, today's economy, today's consumerism. So in that sense, it's part of that tendency. Can you yourself, as a consumer of what later became your company, your target, your segment, what were you looking for when you're saying that, okay, I wanted to go to Vietnam like my peers? What do you really mean as a Muslim to go there in the same conditions? What is for you the Muslim tourism, friendly tourism?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one of the biggest challenges we've had as an industry, as a Muslim travel industry over the past 8 to 10 years now, has been finding what this definition actually means. It started off as halal friendly. It started off as halal travel, and then we sort of started going into the world of Sharia compliant. And at that point, I felt that it was a juncture that a lot of people decided that, hang on a minute, this is really tough for us to deal with. We want to get cancelled, like Shelina said. We don't want to put our brand at risk and put our current crop of customers in a situation where they have to make a decision whether to buy from us or not. The truth of the matter is that I as a traveler, want everything that a normal traveler experiences that fits within my lifestyle. And for us, and a lot of the research that we do here at Hala and Serendipity, it actually revolves a lot around the experience. And it's experience first, and it's the hygiene factors second. And I'm not putting them as a 1 and 2, but I'm putting them as the way that a Muslim traveler, aged between sort of 24 to 40, will look at how they're going to plan their trip. So I'll take an example. During this lockdown period, Portugal was one of the places that we were allowed to travel to Portugal and vice versa for a short period of time. And we did a bit of analysis on what were people doing in terms of searches. And there were a few other Muslim countries they could go to. They could go to Turkey at that point. And you'll be surprised at the number of searches that we had for Lisbon and the Algarve were as much as we had going into Turkey. And the reason being is that they literally only had 2 options. So for them, the experience of going to Portugal had many similarities as going to Turkey. The idea that they can go and have a great trip in Portugal is at the forefront of their decision making. The second part of that is, okay, where can I stay? Where can I eat? Where can I pray? And ultimately, those are 3 really simple questions to answer based on the infrastructure of where your property, for example, if you're a hotel, where you're located. And one of the things that we do for a lot of our clients is that before they travel, we let them know, especially if they're going to a non-Muslim city, country, we let them know where they can eat, where they can go and pray on a Friday, where they can maybe meet some other Muslim communities, because whilst they're not going to go on an excursion with other Muslims, and they're quite happy to go on an excursion with all types of travelers, it'll be nice to go and see how the local Muslim community has fared. What is their local cuisine like? And that's a really engaging part of travel. And whether you're Muslim or not, the joy of travel is meeting other people, and that doesn't change for Muslim travelers.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the joys is the very personal experience of sharing with the locals, but without having to renounce to your own identity. So finding this as a bridge between where you go and who you are in that sense. Okay, so in that sense, 2 questions here, Nabeel. One, would it be possible that you could quantify, in a way, give us some figures of what that Muslim-friendly tourism means? Of course, that one thing is globally, which are huge numbers, but do you have any insights roughly about what that could mean in the case of Europe, which is precisely what we are moving in with Portugal and Andalusia? This is one thing. And the second thing I would like to ask you, and that is more related to SMEs. Based on your experience, have you had any experience in which a hotel, I don't know, whatever hospitality facility, you have asked them, okay, I'm going to bring Muslim. If you make the effort, if you can make the effort of adapting minimally, what has been the reaction in some cases? Because what we have the audience right now is SMEs on the hospitality sector. So I'm sure that they would like to know what could be, first, the potential, second, the reactions that they will have to face.
Of course, and that's been part of my mission over the last decade. Is really to open up the opportunities to countries that wouldn't necessarily have thought of the Muslim market as a viable commercial option. And that commercial viability is really important, because I would not expect any business to do something where they cannot benefit from it, both commercially and socially. I think both of them play hand in hand. And at the end of the day, if you're going to make changes or you're going to make accommodations, then you need to see a return on that, and that's really important. Muslims in Europe are avid travelers, whether they, I mean, our experiences in the UK, and we know what their characteristics are like, but we've had, you know, customers coming in from Norway, from the Scandic region, from France, from Spain as well. But I would say that UK travelers are quite adventurous. They have this characteristic where they like to discover new places, and they like to almost do it on their own. They don't necessarily need hand-holding, and that makes it quite nice for service providers. So when it comes to hotels, for example, one of our biggest pieces of advice is that they don't necessarily have to change their hotel for a whole year. They don't need to find, they don't have to buy in a whole new kitchen or create a new building just for cooking for Muslim travelers. There are really subtle changes that you can make to your service, but I think the most important thing is to recognize who you're welcoming to your property. And this really runs for whether they are Muslim, whether they are vegan, whether they are, have a family, whether they need special assistance. The rules are still the same. But for Muslim travelers, priority number one has always been food, because most travelers would have breakfast in their hotels, which doesn't mean that the hotel has to specifically change their buffet for the whole day, for a week or however long that person's staying there. But being aware of what halal consumption means is a huge step to understanding how to treat those customers when they're sitting down for breakfast.
Nabeel, if I'm understanding correctly, and I think this is important for the audience, you're meaning that you don't have to, in a way, adapt fully 100% permanently to the Muslim-friendly tourism adaptation, but you can share both Muslim and non-Muslim, respecting certain minimums, but you can share. And as an SME, that's very important.
Exactly. Understanding those boundaries is really important. A Muslim traveler will quite happily have breakfast in a hotel, and if there are no halal meat options, as long as their food has been prepared in a halal way. So, for example, they're taking a breakfast as an example, but let's say their eggs have been prepared separately in a separate pan, for example. So there's no cross-contamination, and they can have their coffee, and they can have things on the buffet where it's labeled correctly and it's labeled accurately, and the serving has got good hygiene. Once they finish their breakfast, they're going out to sightsee. So you've done your job. When they arrive into the hotel, removing any alcohol from their minibar is such an easy thing to do. If you have 2 or 3 prayer mats in storage, just pop one on their bed. The sentiment alone will add so much goodwill to your brand that you don't have to invest in a huge marketing campaign. You don't have to invest in targeted social ads to Muslim travelers, because those small changes, believe me, make such a huge difference to the reaction of those travelers. And whilst we are obviously a very digital audience, you can never underestimate the power of word of mouth. Those travelers will come back, they will speak to somebody else, and they say, look, they'll post it on Instagram and say, look at what they did. That's really cool. And they'll remember that.
That's exactly one thing I wanted to ask you. This hybrid of we are digital, but still the mouth-to-mouth, ear-to-mouth works a lot, especially with this value of community feeling among the Muslim society that Shelina was talking about. So the digital matters, but also a very personal environment also matters a lot in terms of prescriptor of visiting again that place.
Yeah, and something else I've noticed a trend over the last couple of years is that if you go to TripAdvisor, and whether you're Muslim or not, you swear by TripAdvisor, even though the reviews are sometimes biased or skewed. In the main, it's a good tool. It's a great tool to find out what people think of a hotel. And if you look for keywords, if you look for your own keywords within TripAdvisor for a hotel or your hotel, it's a really good gauge to see how people are reacting to services that you would like to provide. So I remember going to a few hotels, I think it was in Mexico, and just typing in halal into a couple of hotels, and suddenly, you know, there's people that saying, oh my God, they provided me with, you know, halal food for the week, or, you know, they managed to provide me with, you know, a bit more privacy in my room, for example, you know, and those sort of things are absolutely golden. I mean, they're so easy to implement, but the value that comes out of it, you know, can be huge.
Definitely, it can make a difference if you are, even as I said, a small hospitality place, a small restaurant, a small hotel, but you are able to. I guess that Nabeel, it has to be often the demand in advance. Say we're going to be a group going to, I don't know what hotel, I don't know what restaurant. Can you offer? But you have to tell in advance. In fact, in not at the facto issue that we are here. What do you offer? Yeah. Right? It's quite the trend.
Absolutely.
They should do.
And one thing I think with the audience that's here, and I want to sort of relate this directly to the audience, is that you have a great opportunity. You're not competing at the moment for the Muslim traveler with other hotels in your region, with neighboring countries even. You're not sitting in the middle of Southeast Asia or the Middle East, you know, where, you know, there are so many choices, you know, that it kind of becomes a blur. You have a really good opportunity to be able to stand out amongst the crowd, and, you know, by obviously having the right channels to market those those services, or, you know, changes that you can make to your hotel or restaurant or whatever. You know, it's a great opportunity to stand out, especially with the limited amount of options that we have in Europe as Muslim travelers.
Thank you very much. Now, one question to start the debate with the public. One question I would like to ask both of you, something inevitable in today's context. Shelina, but also Nabeel, both of you, what sort of impact do you think that today, this is a question that everybody's asking in every single sector, in every single country of the world. So you already know the question. I don't know if you already know the answer, but what is the impact that we can expect, either in general terms, Shelina, in terms of pattern of consumption and so on, for the Muslim consumers with COVID on the unfortunate situation right now, and in the case of Nabeel, precisely on the Muslim-friendly tourism as tourists themselves? What can we expect in that sense as the impact in those two segments, in general and in the tourism?
So let me give the general view, and then Nabeel can talk about the specific. So one of the reports that the audience may want to have a look at is an annual study called The State of the Global Islamic Economy. An Islamic economy is the term usually used to describe all these different parts of engagement with Muslim audiences across all the categories. And that report for 2021 has just been published last week, I think, so it's hot off the press. And while 2019 was actually a bumper year when it comes to Muslim audiences, and there were huge numbers of investments and huge amount of growth, no surprises that the initial signs for 2020 are that there has been a contraction, and it looks like there's going to be about an 8% decrease across the addressable market for Muslim consumers. But we're still looking at around $2 trillion of spend every year. So, you know, there's quite a few pennies and cents to be made. And as I was saying earlier, for businesses that are going to be looking at tackling the contraction of the economy generally, these audiences which are not on the radar are going to be very important to growth. And it's worth remembering that Muslim audiences are very young. 2/3 of Muslims are under 30. So this is where your investment should be going.
You envisage that it's going to be, you envisage that it's going to be a resilient segment in terms of consumerism.
Exactly, because they will be bouncing back faster. Muslim tourism, I think, you know, to be expected, probably is not going to bounce back as fast. The State of the Global Islamic Economy is saying that most of the other categories should be back up to where they were by the end of 2021, which is good news. But I think Nabeel, you're probably better placed to think about Muslim-friendly travel than I am.
Nabeel, floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shelina.
Nicely set up. Yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, travel across the board is going to be affected. I remember back in March, the CEO of Air France said that we're not going to get travel back to levels of 2019 until 2023, and that I think a lot of people turned around and said, yeah, what, you know, thanks for scaring us. But the reality is that, you know, it is going to take time for levels to get back up to normal. I think with the Muslim traveler, and especially the age range that we're looking at here, the millennial age range, they always have a propensity to travel. They always want to travel. It's not something they tend to sacrifice out of the list of things that they want to do in a year. Whether they just need that escape from, you know, the normal day-to-day of work, or whether they just have this sort of natural affiliation to getting on a plane and going away with the family, taking that time, you know, to almost regroup and spend that time with your family. We are as we've mentioned throughout this, we are very community-led. And that sometimes plays a really big part in it. So I'm actually quite positive about how Muslim travelers specifically will react in 2021. We're already seeing signs of plans being made. We've had customers calling up saying, you know, when can I go to here? When can I go to there? Can I hold flights now? And asking the questions that you want them to be asking. If they weren't asking any questions, I'll be really worried. But right now they're engaged. They are looking for the future. And I wouldn't say they're necessarily scared by COVID. You know, they're aware and they're responsible about it in the main. And they know the risks involved with traveling. But at the end of the day, they're taking a much more pragmatic view about it, in my opinion, assessing the risks, but also, you know, knowing that, you know, travel for them is part of their yearly things that they look forward to.
Shelina, one question from my side in that sense. You're talking about the globality of the Muslim consumers, Generation M. Of course, we cannot just target focus doing a zoom in precisely on what are the countries, but in today's context of COVID, the growing digitalization and so on, lack of connectivity right now, physical connectivity, which markets do you think that could be more relevant in terms of the coming, I would say, 5 years, although we cannot say where we will be in 6 months. But with your leverage on the issue, where do you think could be good markets from this sort of Muslim consumers, either Muslim majority or Muslim non-majority, but significant consumers? At a global scale, where do you think they could be good markets in the coming years? And also in the case of Europe, which is what we have inside our audience, which is Spain, where do you think that these markets in Europe can be more resilient and relevant? Thank you.
So in terms of the overall trajectory of the Islamic economy, the big opportunities won't be any surprise. You have the Middle East, so the MENA, Middle East, North Africa countries, particularly the GCC, where you have higher per capita spending. But in terms of size of markets and the way that they have advanced in thinking about Muslim consumers, Indonesia is huge, Malaysia is huge. Singapore, as a small country and as a Muslim minority country sitting within that space, is actually very important and influential. And then we have big markets by number: Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, some of the other North African and, you know, countries like South Africa and East Africa. And there is a huge opening opportunity in India, where actually we will have soon the largest Muslim population in the world. And we see that the Muslim demographic is both young and becoming slowly increasingly affluent. There's some interesting brand developments happening in India. And then coming over to the West, the US has a very interesting conversation about Muslim identity and halal. But if we think particularly around Europe, I should mention Turkey as well, which is obviously a huge, huge market and very influential outside its own boundaries, because it is really the home to a lot of the startups that have become, you know, very established businesses like Modenisa, which is the fashion one. And you know, as Nabeel was saying, they have started to develop quite a well-regarded Muslim-friendly travel sector, which is very appealing for Muslims who live in minority countries to just hop over. But I think if we're looking in Europe specifically, I mean, we have some big Muslim populations in Europe. So in the UK, we have in excess of 4 million. In France, I think it's coming up for almost 6 million. In Germany, it's around 5 million. So when you add up the Muslim minority populations in Europe, they actually exceed the populations of some of those Middle East countries. So if you're thinking about how to prioritize your audiences on sheer numbers, your Muslim minorities in Europe are larger in size than entire countries that you have in other places around the world. And so, you know, kind of go, oh, okay, well, maybe we should be paying a bit more attention closer to home.
But Shelina,
And
sorry, saying that as an aggregate, of course, is a quite significant population. But if you were a brand, say that you want to target the Muslim population of Europe, you're a brand producing, I don't know, whatever sort of gourmet food, and you want to target the Muslim consumers, would you define a different strategy with different colors, branding, whatever, to target the Muslims in, say, UK than using that same strategy to Germany? Or you would eventually develop one which is common to the European consumer, Muslim consumers, which is absolutely different from the Gulf consumers in that sense? Would you go country by country or more continental approach, let's say?
Well, this is exactly the kind of question that we work with clients to answer. So clients come to us and say, and we kind of worked with them to say, well, there is this opportunity here. Is this something that we can maybe concept test in one country? And then just kind of poll test it in some of the others and just see if it generally works or might need some refinement. So obviously some of the faces that you would have on that campaign, maybe some of the messages would be a little bit more elevated than the others. But typically the excitement about this audience is that you can have that same brand message and the same campaign that works across all of those countries. So I think it's typical in a campaign that you might start to have some regional variations in that concept, but typically you can create one single concept that would work across all of those different countries. So it's exciting, and the numbers themselves and the fact it's, you know, greenfield opportunity should in this difficult time be making us think about what the opportunity is close to home in Europe.
Thank you very much, Shelina. Nabeel, I think that it's time that we give back the floor, the micro, and the screen to Germinal to see if he has questions from the public. So, Shelina, Nabeel, thank you very much. Germinal, the floor is yours again.
Estupendo, Javier. Muchísimas gracias. Quería felicitaros a los tres. Primero por haberos ceñido escrupulosamente al tiempo de intervención. A mí particularmente me ha parecido un debate muy ameno, muy fácil de seguir, que nos ha dado mucha información útil, que es lo importante en estos casos. Yo, antes de pasar a las preguntas que están recopilando mis compañeros, voy a aprovechar la posición que tengo hoy y voy a hacer yo las primeras, os voy a hacer una a cada uno. Hago las tres juntas y así pues Javier contesta, después Shelina y termina Nabeel. Pero antes de hacer las preguntas, yo sí quería resaltar un poco algo de las intervenciones que hemos tenido esta mañana aquí. En primer lugar, hay una palabra que se ha repetido con mucha asiduidad, que ha sido entendimiento. Y me ha alegrado mucho de oírla, porque precisamente a eso se dedica esta casa, a eso lleva la Fundación Tres Culturas más de 20 años dedicada en cuerpo y alma, ¿no? El director de la Fundación suele decir que pues, para conocer hay que saber, y yo creo que con la sabiduría que nos han aportado hoy los tres ponentes estamos más cerca de conocer este mercado y conocer a estas personas también, ¿no? Este tipo de musulmanes. Por lo tanto, me ha alegrado mucho oír la palabra entendimiento, o esa palabra que tan difícil es para todos los traductores y que yo saco recurrentemente, que es la convivencia, ¿no? Y me repito, es a lo que la Fundación Tres Culturas se dedica. Y por otro lado, me gustaría también destacar otra palabra que ha sonado mucho y que es difícil oír en estos días, en el que todo, cuando se habla de negocio, cuando se habla de economía, que es la oportunidad. También ha salido recurrentemente la palabra oportunidad y creo que hemos visto que aquí existe una gran oportunidad para consolidar mercados, para abrir empresas dentro de muy poco tiempo, ¿no? Ya Nabeel creo que ha sido el que ha dicho que ya pues van recibiendo llamadas, gente interesada en, bueno, dónde vamos a poder ir y cómo vamos a poder ir. De hecho, la pregunta que tengo para Nabeel va un poco por ahí. Entonces, insisto, antes de dar paso a las preguntas del público, yo quería aprovechar y hacer 3 preguntas. La primera es para Javier y es un poco a nivel personal. Yo he detectado porque también otra idea que ha salido mucho es que este tipo de productos y servicios, que siempre se nos olvida que también hay servicios, no solo están destinados a musulmanes, sino que hay otro tipo de consumidor que también le pueden interesar estos productos, ¿no? Yo he notado, por ejemplo, en sitios, tanto hoteles como restaurantes que he ido, que tenían estos servicios halal, que hay cierta sofisticación en el producto y en el servicio, ¿no? Entonces, me gustaría, Javier, que por favor incidieras un poco más en esa idea de sofisticación que parece que este tipo de clientes requiere, ¿no? Por otro lado, la pregunta, Shelina, es obligada. ¿Cómo podemos conseguir tu libro a aquellos que no estamos en el Reino Unido? Por favor, indícanos, porque es verdad que he leído reseñas y ya he comentado antes que son superventas, pero bueno, a mí me gustaría adquirirlo personalmente. Entonces, indícanos, por favor, dónde sería posible conseguir una copia de tu libro, especialmente aquellos que no estamos en Reino Unido, ¿no? Y por último, para Nabeel, pues a mí me gustaría también que no sé si lo ha mencionado, pero que nos dé también, por favor, una referencia de su empresa, una página web, un teléfono, algún sitio donde podamos ver esas ofertas de viajes tan estupendas que nos ha contado y de servicios, porque claro, alguno de aquí de España nos puede interesar también ir para allá y viceversa. Entonces me gustaría que nos diera un poco alguna referencia más donde podamos ver, tipo web sobre todo, ¿eh? Javier, cuando quieras, y después contestáis Shelina y Nabeel.
Thank you very much, Germinal. I think that the question on the sophistication, Shelina has more knowledge and leverage on that than I do. But nevertheless, what we are seeing is that this growing segment of consumers that you were commenting, Shelina, which are the Generation M, which are urban, which are increasingly middle class, which are increasingly having not only an income capacity, but also having certain types of jobs which have to do much more with liberal jobs. We can say lawyers, designers, IT, software engineers, and so on. Of course, there is a trend in mature, aware consumers globally towards more sustainable products, towards more value-added products, towards better design, products in a broad sense, products and services, as Germinal said. But they are, of course, becoming themselves more demanding on the quality of the services. It's not anymore meat. It used to be about meat. Even if you ask what is halal, most probably the average would say it's meat killed in a certain way. But it's getting much more sophisticated. Meat is not enough. It's a good beginning. It's a good beginning, but a bad end if that's all what you can offer. You have to sophisticate increasingly. And that sophistication can bring interest to your own product or services to non-Muslim consumers, because there is nothing which is Muslim-friendly or halal that cannot be eaten, used, consumed by non-Muslims. So in that sense, there is a growing trend of demand of sophistication, of diversification, that is absolutely increasingly also used, enjoyed by not Muslim. And we are converging, Muslims and non-Muslims, aware consumers, on this bio, eco, sustainable, socially committed tendency. So definitely, halal Muslim-friendly things could be absolutely used, consumed by families, by others, non-Muslim audience and consumers. But then for sure, Shelina, by the way, Shelina, you know it, I do have your book. I got it long ago and I have it signed when we met some time ago.
So this is the book. I don't know if you guys can see that. So it should be available via the internet, the magic of the internet. You should be able to get a copy if you want a real copy like that one. Otherwise, there are digital versions available as well. So hopefully being far away and in different places shouldn't matter. Otherwise, I'm sure we could arrange some kind of special delivery. So don't worry, all things are possible. I think it's only in English, sadly, at the moment, but maybe Javier and I can do some magic and see if there's a way to get a Spanish version.
Muchísimas gracias.
An audiobook would be great, Shelina. I think you're perfectly set up to get that onto Audible.
Everyone fancies me doing some bedtime reading about the opportunity of the Islamic economy.
Exactly. It's good running. It's good running scripts. I've actually just added a couple of links to the chat here. Thank you for offering for us to just share a few links. But there are actually two links that are probably more relevant for the audience. The first one is a white paper that we wrote, really focusing around the Muslim millennial traveler. It's completely free. Just go to the link, download it, and there's information there that you can get a bit more get a bit more of an idea of how the Muslim millennial traveler thinks and looks for. And then the second one, which is the / spotlight, that one is for any hotels that are looking to be part of Rahala and the Rahala site. We're definitely putting a priority on hotels that are able to provide services to Muslim travelers that are in non-Muslim countries, because we feel that they really need to have as much support as they can. All of this is, for us, we don't charge anything for it. At the end of the day, the mutual benefit is getting people to book and sending them off to use your services. So feel free to use either of those. If you have any questions about what you can provide your Muslim travelers when they arrive, if you need any more clarification on that, we're always open to provide advice over email, via Zoom or whatever.
Sí, para nosotros sería un placer también poder compartir toda esta información con todos los interesados. Y de hecho, bueno, pues no hay ningún problema por ninguna parte, así lo haremos. Bueno, pues son bastantes las preguntas que tenemos, desgraciadamente no el tiempo, ¿eh? Así que cierto es que algunas preguntas ya se han tratado durante la sesión, pero entiendo que cuando nos las plantean es porque a lo mejor quieren un poco más de profundidad. Insisto, no tenemos demasiado tiempo, vamos a recoger un par de preguntas para cada interviniente, un par de preguntas para Shelina y un par de preguntas para Nabeel, y con esto cerraríamos el encuentro de hoy. Shelina, la primera pregunta que tenemos es la siguiente. Dice, al dirigirnos a consumidores musulmanes, ¿cómo de relevante es su origen o su background cultural a la hora de considerarlos con respecto a este mercado? O sea, se refieren a pakistaníes, árabes, turcos, ¿no? Ese origen o ese background cultural, ¿cómo de importante es?
You need to decide whether you are talking to that consumer as a Muslim or as somebody from that particular country or heritage. And sometimes the two can overlap, but that's really your first question. Am I trying to tap into something in their life that is attention based on their Muslim identity? Is it Ramadan? Am I traveling because I want something halal? Am I looking for finance which meets my Islamic principles? And then decide accordingly.
Estupendo. Pasamos ahora a Nabeel. Nos preguntan aquí en la audiencia cuáles son los principales destinos que los musulmanes millennials prefieren hacer en Europa. Bueno, nos preguntan en Europa y en el mundo, ¿no? Pero en principio, si tienes algunos datos que aportarnos, ¿no? ¿Cuáles son esos destinos?
Sure, and I'm going to split this out into two parts. One is actually for Europe's traveling within Europe, and the other one is for travelers coming in from, say, Southeast Asia, the US, and as a Muslim traveler and coming to Europe. The reason being is that they have two very different expectations and experiences. Europeans within Europe tends to be long weekends. It tends to be the second, third, maybe fourth trip that they're doing throughout the year. And if we look at the bookings that we have on our site and the searches that we have on our site, they tend to be the main cities. So Barcelona is probably number one on that list. One of my favorite cities. I love Barcelona. I think Barcelona does an amazing job in its marketing as a whole. It not necessarily just to Muslims, and that there is a what's the word? There is an easy way for Muslim travel to say, yeah, I want to do that as well, and I want to go to the Camp Nou. I want to go to see all the sites. So the major cities are Amsterdam's a huge option at the moment for a lot of our UK-based customers because it's a nice weekend away. And then some of the some of the historical cities. So Rome is obviously very popular. Lisbon is now becoming quite popular because of it's a beautiful city and obviously it has a couple of hotels now.
Muy bien.
Are able to serve.
Sí, por favor, continúa.
If you allow me just 1 second, Nabeel, you were mentioning Barcelona. As I'm in Barcelona, if you allow me my just add 15 seconds ad here. Barcelona was, before COVID impact, was really becoming a quite trendy destination for Muslim-friendly tourism. And in fact, we saw it in several MasterCard or several credit rating reports that Barcelona was, as a city, really growing in terms of attractiveness. That doesn't mean that Barcelona is as ready as it should be to attract or fulfill all its potential. So it was attractive beyond its real adaptability. So imagine if we are really able to adapt ourselves. That would be really a turning point in our attractiveness, definitely for such a kind of consumers. I mean, sorry, I just wanted to point out.
That's okay. Just to finalize, just to finish off on Muslims outside of Europe, they love to go to as many places as possible, right? So we have quite a big agency network out in Malaysia and Singapore and Indonesia, and they will try to cram in 10 cities in 10 days, and it's purely because they've heard so much about these cities. They want to tick it off their list. So if you are looking to market to that part of the world, I'm specifically saying Southeast Asia here, then having those services in place means that they can choose, let's say Barcelona or Lisbon over another city purely because those services are there in place and it's nice and easy for them to plan in.
Muy bien, vamos a recoger las dos últimas preguntas. Y esta es para Shelina. La verdad que la pregunta me parece muy interesante, pero creo que casi daría para un nuevo foro. De todas formas, te voy a pedir, Shelina, concreción, porque la pregunta es la siguiente. ¿Existen diferencias significativas con respecto al comportamiento de este tipo de consumidores de la primera generación de musulmanes que eran migrantes y la segunda y la tercera, que ya son nativos?
Okay, so you want me, I have to answer in 2 sentences a question which is enough for a PhD thesis. The short answer is yes, there is a difference. And one of those differences is that what is Generation M. They want to bring their modern views of life together with their faith and be very explicit about them, whereas they may talk about their first generation immigrant parents as establishing some traditions, just doing the basics to get established in the new country, but without necessarily thinking about their identity as formed from both of these things. And one of the data points that the audience can check is that the pride in being, for example, both British and Muslim is very high. So 74% of British Muslims say that their faith is very important to them along with their identity. and they feel more positively about their Britishness than British people generally. And that is true across all of the Muslim minority populations in Europe. So there is a big shift, which the whole of Generation M is the proof of that shift, of the difference between the arrival immigrants and the subsequent generations.
Muy bien. Y la última pregunta para Nabeel, creo que va un poco relacionada también con algo que él había comentado antes, y la pregunta se centra en la COVID-19. Es un poco, bueno, que nos hagas una previsión de cómo piensas que puede evolucionar el sector tras esta crisis. Ya nos has comentado que ya empieza a haber cierto interés, pero a corto plazo, corto medio plazo, ¿cómo crees que va a evolucionar este sector?
I tend to be more positive than negative. I'm a person that looks at things half full rather than half empty. If you had asked me this a month ago, I would have probably said that 2021 was going to be probably the most difficult year for travel since travel, the industry began, even harder than 2020. But I think the news of a potential vaccine, which I still think needs to be taken with some caution because we haven't got it out yet. This hasn't gone away yet. I think just changes my perspective on that a little bit. And I do feel like towards the end of 2021, we might start to see travel returning to some normality. Personally, I think January, February, March, Q1 of next year is going to remain in limbo. It's going to be, we're not sure exactly how it could turn out. But we're hoping that the signs are right within the aviation industry, within the regulatory bodies are all stating that by sort of April and Q2, we might be able to find common agreements between destinations to allow travelers to have almost like an enhanced travel corridor. So in short, I would say, next 3 months, I don't think there's going to be much change. 3 to 6 months, I think we'll start to see improvements. We're probably looking at maybe still 30–40% occupancies for hotels and air capacities. But let's hope we have a really good winter season next year, or even a late summer season next year, and try to sort of bring this whole industry back to where it needs to be.
Estupendo. Muy bien. Bueno, pues creo que hemos agotado el tiempo que teníamos hoy destinado a este segundo foro participativo online. A mí solo me queda agradecerles a Shelina, a Nabeel, a Javier y, por supuesto, a toda la audiencia el tiempo que nos han dispensado, y simplemente recordarles a todos ustedes que el proyecto, lógicamente, seguirá haciendo actividades de las que ustedes pueden estar informados puntualmente a través de la web que tiene el proyecto, o a través de la propia web de la Fundación Tres Culturas, que es tresculturas.org. Les animamos también a que, por favor, sigan nuestras redes sociales, porque por ahí es donde estamos emitiendo, en muchos casos, como en el de hoy, este tipo de eventos. Y ya como colofón, con respecto al proyecto, recordar o informar a aquellos que no lo sepan que estamos desarrollando una plataforma informática y una app para poder, destinada a empresas, sobre todo pequeñas y medianas empresas, para poder ofrecer todos esos servicios, evidentemente sin coste alguno para las empresas, y tanto especialmente a los socios portugueses como a los socios y empresarios, ¿no? Como a los socios y empresarios andaluces, decirles que les informaremos cuando esta app y esta plataforma estén disponibles para que formen parte de ella. Podrán exhibir sus productos, podrán publicitarse, y eso será, bueno, pues lo antes posible el año que viene. Cierto es que el procedimiento administrativo se encuentra bastante avanzado. Y para terminar, pues voy a empezar también, voy a acabar como empecé, ¿no? Recordándoles que este evento está dentro del programa POCTEC, de este programa operativo transfronterizo en España, entre España y Portugal en este caso, y que sin la ayuda y la cofinanciación del FEDER, del Fondo de Desarrollo Europeo, pues no sería posible que lo tuviéramos. Lo dejamos aquí. Muchísimas gracias a todos y hasta la próxima.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Bye.